Chapter 2271. Cameron woke up and felt someone hugging her from behind. She took a deep breath, carefully moved his hand away, and slowly turned over. It really was Waylon. Awoken by her movement, Waylon pulled her back into his arms and buried his face in her neck. "Don't move. Go to sleep." Cameron whispered, "Behave yourself." She was already in Dee Dee's room, yet he was still there. Waylon's lips curled, but his eyes were still closed. "I'll behave when you're around." Cameron had finally seen how naughty this man was, but she couldn't wake Dee Dee. She took a deep breath and said in a very low voice, "Go back to your room." Dee Dee must not see him. Waylon opened his eyes and rested his head on one hand. "Are you coming back with me?" Cameron choked. If it weren't because it was dark, he would see how red her face was. "Dream on." Waylon held her tightly and kissed her forehead. "All right, sleep. I'll go back in the morning." Cameron was so tired she fell asleep in his arms. Waylon looked at her and moved her hair away from her face. He had a helpless smile on. "Why are you avoiding me yet trusting me so much?" Was she not worried that he would carry her back to their room while she was asleep? The next day, Cameron and Dee Dee went down for breakfast. Dee Dee had some cereal and looked up at her. She almost said something but didn't. Cameron noticed that she was going to say something, so she smiled. "What's wrong?" Dee Dee asked her question. "Does Uncle Wayne like you a lot?" Cameron froze and awkwardly looked away. "Does he? I woke up last night and saw him hugging you in his sleep." Cameron was rendered speechless. She had assumed that Dee Dee wouldn't find out if Waylon left in the morning, but she had woken up. That made things awkward. Dee Dee suddenly asked, "Are you going to have a baby too?" Cameron almost spat her food out. She coughed, wiped her mouth with a napkin, and smiled awkwardly. "Dee Dee, who told you that I'm going to have a baby?" Dee Dee tilted her head. "My aunt had a baby after sleeping with Uncle Coleman, so if you sleep with Uncle Wayne, you will have a baby too." Cameron placed her hand on her forehead and explained. "Dee Dee, your aunt and Uncle Coleman are in a relationship. Their sleeping arrangement is different from what I do with Uncle Wayne." Dee Dee was confused. "Isn't it just sleeping?" Cameron explained, "Of course not. We're just sleeping." Dee Dee had no idea what that meant. Cameron sighed and then touched her head. "You'll find out one day when you're older." After breakfast, Cameron decided to bring Dee Dee back to the Seaview Villa. Freya immediately hugged Dee Dee the moment they walked in. "Dee Dee, are you all right? Are you in pain?" Dee Dee shook her head. "I'm fine, Auntie Freya." Freya cupped her cheeks and saw that she was a lot more cheerful than before. She was relieved that Dee Dee wasn't more traumatized after what happened the other day. Cameron looked at her. "I'm sorry about what happened to Dee Dee." Freya slowly stood up and smiled. "Don't worry, I don't blame you. I should thank you for helping her." Cameron smiled. "I love Dee Dee. I can't let anything happen to her." After that, she remembered something. "Miss Pruitt, do you know about Jessie Blue Man?" Chapter 2272. Freya looked down. "I don't know a lot, but I know that she's not really trying to help." "Dee Dee." Cameron said, "She's not. She got close to Dee Dee because she wanted to use her against you." Freya looked shocked. "Use Dee Dee against me?" "Yes, Jessie's target is Coleman. She wanted to manipulate Dee Dee and trick her into hurting your child, thinking that maybe if you lost your child, you would love her more." Freya pressed her lips together. When she remembered all the rumors that started surfacing recently and the text, they all sounded like they were from Jessie. Colton came back in the afternoon and saw Freya watering the plants in the garden. He frowned, walked over to her, and then covered her shoulders with his jacket. "Why are you outside?" "I was bored, so I did something." Freya put down the watering can and turned to look at him. "By the way, Dee Dee is coming back tonight." He was surprised, then looked down. "Isn't she staying in Emperon?" Freya asked, "Do you want her to stay there forever?" Colton choked. Of course not. Freya stared at him and smiled. You're the one who made Dee Dee see Jesse. Thanks to you and the woman who is interested in you, we don't even know what kind of life Dee Dee has been living for the past half a year. Colton was rendered speechless. He knew that Freya would one day use this against him, and he was ready. I'm accountable for what happened to her. Freya looked away. But you would rather believe that woman than Dee Dee. Colton didn't know what to say, but what could he say? It was a fact that he didn't trust Dee Dee. Freya turned her face away and tooted. Don't speak to me for a week. I'm going to ignore you. She then walked into the house while holding her belly. Colton pinched the bridge of his nose, because he knew he was in trouble. The little one's issue was still unresolved, but the adult was declaring war. The next morning, when the maid went to clean the study, she jumped. Sir, did you not sleep last night? Colton stayed in the study the entire night and barely slept. He leaned back into the chair and looked fatigued. I couldn't sleep. Go ahead with your chores. The maid left. After she went downstairs, the other maids gathered around and started gossiping. Was he chased out of his room last night? Shoo, be quiet. Colton had never been kept out of the room from what they knew. Freya rarely had arguments with him, so there was a slim chance he would be kept out of the room. He must have done something to make her so angry, but if he compromised with sleeping in the study with this temper, he must have done something to deserve it. Freya woke up at 8 a.m. and felt angry when she looked at the empty space next to her. He hadn't slept in the room just because she said so. He had never been so obedient before this. After cleaning up, she went downstairs for breakfast and frowned when she didn't see Colton there. Where's Mr. Goldman? The maid replied, he left early. Freya looked up. He left without breakfast? The maid paused. He had a bowl of cereal. All right. Freya picked up a slice of toast and started having breakfast. The maids were confused. If she was angry at him, why would she still care if he had breakfast or not? Chapter 2273. At Black Gold. Colton rested his eyes on the couch when Leonardo knocked. He slowly opened his eyes. Come in. He opened the door and walked in. Sir, did you not rest well last night? Colton crossed his arms and leaned back on the couch. It wasn't that he didn't rest well, he didn't rest at all. How is it going with the lawyer, Mr. Golding? Leonardo said, Mr. Golding has already gotten a hold of Mr. George's son. He's currently placed in a villa on the outskirts. Colton nodded. All right. Leonardo looked at him. Are you not going to rest? He couldn't just rest, because he wanted to punish the George. Was it such an urgent matter? Colton rubbed the bridge of his nose and asked, what do children like? Leonardo was surprised. You're asking me? Colton raised his brows. Do you see someone else here? Leonardo scratched his cheeks. I don't have a kid. How would I know what children like? He realized who Colton was asking for, so he asked. Is it for Miss Dee Dee? Was he trying to get close to Dee Dee? Colton didn't speak. Leonardo smiled. She's a girl. I'm guessing girls prefer dolls of sorts. Colton paused and thought about it. It was true. Daisy used to love dolls. Dee Dee would probably like them too. He looked at Leonardo and said, help me go pick a few. Leonardo smirked. You want me to do that? He nodded. I'll double your bonus if you pick good ones. Leonardo sighed and accepted the double bonus. All right, I'll get going. Meanwhile, Ronald waited outside his son's school for a long time but didn't see his son coming out. He saw a teacher in charge of his son's class walk out and rushed forward. Hello, Miss Cavell. I'm Amos' father. Miss Cavell looked at Ronald. Mr. George? Ronald replied, I'm here to pick up Amos, but he's not out yet. The teacher was shocked. Didn't you send someone to pick him up? Ronald's face dropped. When did I send someone? But that person said that you asked him to pick up Amos. He had your contact number too and knew Amos and your wife's names. I thought you were too busy, so you sent someone. The reply made Ronald realize that something was very wrong. He grabbed the teacher by her shoulders. How could you not call to confirm? Miss Cavell was stunned. Did something happen to him? Should we call the police? The word police calmed Ronald down. If they called the police, the woman would use it as an excuse to make his life difficult if she found out. He would have a huge problem then. Why did this have to happen at this time? Let me check again. Ronald was going to leave when Miss Cavell asked, "Are you sure you don't want to make a report?" "It's my family matter," Ronald said firmly and left. He got into his car and held on to the steering wheel, his mind in a frenzy. On one side, his son was in trouble, and on the other, he had to get a divorce. Should he really call the police? If that woman found out that her son was missing, she would force him into a corner. However, if something happened to his son... Ronald's face turned pale. It was his son. Amos was his only son even if he no longer had feelings for his wife. Chapter 2274. But, was Ronald going to forfeit everything he had for his son? No, he couldn't. Even if he no longer had a son, Jessie could give him another one. Ronald left the school and went straight to Jessie. She was sitting at her dresser with a mask on. When she saw Ronald, she frowned. "Why are you here? Aren't you afraid that your wife will find out?" "Jessie." He stood behind her and looked at her. Amos was taken. Jessie paused, then she put the cap on her moisturizer. "Your son was taken?" Ronald frowned. "It wasn't you?" That person knew Amos' name, his phone number, and his wife's name. It must be someone they knew. He had been speculating who would take his son. It probably wasn't that dumb woman. She would go get him herself. Other than her, the other person he could think of was Jessie. Jessie was surprised and slowly stood up. "Ronnie, what are you trying to say? Do you think that I took him?" Ronald grabbed her shoulders. "Jessie, that wasn't what I meant." Jessie pushed him away. "Why are you questioning me then?" This man was questioning her because of his son. She would have kicked him aside if it wasn't because he could fulfill her material needs. There was no reason that she would need to be involved with him. "Ronnie, is your love for me fake? You're using your son to yell at me. I wouldn't get back with you if I knew this was going to happen." She forced a tear out. Ronald hugged her and felt terrible. "All right, baby, don't cry. I was just asking. I wouldn't blame you even if you did take him. If I lose him, you can give me one, right?" Jessie froze in his arms. She knew that he was a shallow asshole who was only interested in her looks. She also knew how he treated Gina. That was why she never really put in actual feelings when she was with men. All she wanted from them were favors and money. She wasn't dumb. Ronald claimed that he loved her, but if they were to get married, she would end up like his wife when he found someone younger and prettier. She would never expect that he would be cruel enough to ignore his son even if he was in danger and was expecting her to give him another one. She was young and beautiful, so why would she sacrifice herself for men and be used as a tool just for birthing? Even if she wanted children, it would have to be with men like Colton. Yes, her target would always be to marry the rich. Even if Colton had no feelings for her, as long as she could give him a son, she wouldn't care if he had affairs. His son would always be the heir, and her son would be her hope. "Jessie, don't worry. When we get married, we'll have our own children, and I'll treat you both well." Although Jessie felt cold in her heart, she was smirking. Men just loved to give sweet but empty promises. Gina was dumb and believed him, and what happened to her? Jessie smiled and pressed a finger to his lips. "Ronnie, you just know how to make me happy." Ronald grabbed her hand. "Baby, I really do love you." She carried Jessie to the couch, and they started kissing each other. Jessie hugged him tightly, looked up, and took deep breaths. She saw sparks and heard a knock on the door. She stopped and said, "Ronnie, someone is knocking." Chapter 2275. Ronald kissed her. Ignore it. The knocks persisted, and Ronald was so annoyed he couldn't continue. He yelled. Who the fuck is it? He then put his pants back on, got up, and opened the door. The woman standing there made his expression change. Gina suddenly rushed in and gave him a slap on his face. You heartless thing. Give Amos back to me. Her eyes suddenly went to Jessie, who was covering herself with her clothes. Jessie didn't expect that it was her, so she was shocked. Gina had found out about them a while ago, but she couldn't accept it when she saw it with her own eyes. She rushed forward, grabbed something from the table, and was going to hit her. You bitch, you lied to me. Ronnie, help me. Gina pulled her hair and slapped her very hard. Jessie could only cry out in pain. Ronald rushed over and shoved her away. Are you crazy? Gina fell to the floor. Her hand hit the corner of the table and started bleeding. However, her anger numbed the pain. She got up, threw herself onto him, and started hitting him while crying. Ronald George, you useless pig, Amos is your son. How could you kidnap him with this bitch? Give my son back to me. Ronald's face turned pale. What is this Bill's hit? Why would I kidnap him? It's you, admit it. Gina broke down. Ronald, I beg you. All I want is Amos. Do you want a divorce? I don't want any of the money. Just give Amos back to me. Ronald grabbed her hands and dragged her out. Let's speak outside. The entire building was going to hear if she continued. But Gina was so emotional because of what happened to her son that she wouldn't give in. She slapped and bit him. Ronald, you pig. Give my son back to me. It's you, admit it. Gina broke down. Ronald, I beg you. All I want is Amos. Do you want a divorce? I don't want any of the money. Just give Amos back to me. Ronald grabbed her hands and dragged her out. Let's speak outside. The entire building was going to hear if she continued. But Gina was so emotional because of what happened to her son that she wouldn't give in. She slapped and bit him. Ronald, you pig. Give my son back to me. Ronald was out of patience and slapped her. Gina lost her balance, fell, and hit her head on the corner of a table. Ronald didn't care, but continued yelling, you crazy bitch. You won't keep quiet if I don't hit you, will you? But when she wasn't moving, Ronald froze. He saw a pool of blood forming, and Jessie started panicking. Ronnie. Is she dead? Ronnie, call an ambulance. Jessie pulled out her phone to make a call, but Ronald snatched her phone away. Jessie was stunned. Ronnie? Ronald was unusually calm as he stared at his wife, lying on the floor. After a long pause, he said, wouldn't it be great if she died in an accident? Jessie's face turned pale as she looked at Ronald in disbelief. Are you crazy? If she died in my home? If the police found out? Don't worry. I'm here. Ronald hugged Jessie. I'll settle it. Jessie's hands and feet turned cold. This man was horrifying. She started worrying about what he would do to her if he found out she was just using him. Would she end up the same way? At that moment, someone knocked. Jessie was so afraid she jumped and didn't know what to do. Ronald went to get the door, but just opened it a crack. The men standing outside asked, did something happen here? It's too loud. I could hear from next door. Ronald said in a calm tone, nothing. We're just arguing. Chapter 2276. Just when Ronald was about to close the door, the man placed his hand on the door and asked, are you guys fighting? Because I heard quite a lot of commotion going on here. When Ronald was about to shout at the man, Jessie suddenly said, my sister fell down. Hurry up and call the ambulance before it's too late. Damn it. I don't want to become a murderer because of this guy. Even if she's going to die, she can't die here. Ronald did not expect that Jessie would want to save Gina, but he couldn't get angry right now. The man entered the room to check on Gina. When he noticed that she was still breathing, he hastily pulled his phone out and called the emergency center. Soon, the ambulance arrived. The paramedics took Gina to the ambulance, and Jessie heaved out a sigh of relief. She turned to look at Ronald and realized that his face was dark. She thought about something and took a deep breath. "Ronnie, please don't get angry at me. We can't become murderers because of her. If you get caught, then there'll be no one to take care of me." It was true that Ronald was angry with her just now, but his anger ebbed away after listening to Jessie's explanation. He took her into his arms and said, "I'm sorry. My emotions got the best of me. Luckily, you're here to hold me back." He had misunderstood Jessie. It turned out that Jessie did not want him to go to jail. Jessie gnashed her teeth in hatred as she leaned on his arms. After everything was over, she would find a way to get rid of this horrible man. There was a man sitting inside a car, looking at the man and woman hugging each other. He pulled out his phone and made a call. "Just as you expected, Mr. Goldman. Ronald tried to kill his wife." Colton was flipping through a document. When he heard what the man said, something flitted across his eyes. "Keep an eye on him. We must keep Mrs. George alive." The man replied, "Roger that." Colton hung up the call, and Leonardo put a cup of coffee on the desk. "I can't believe that Ronald would want to kill his own wife and disregard his son just because he doesn't want to lose his wealth. Is he still a human?" Colton let out a cold smirk. "He can always have another son and wife. But there's no way he can let go of his wealth." Leonardo lowered his eyes and replied, "I guess Mrs. George should have woken up from her dream by now after seeing Ronald's true face. Well, what a poor thing." Colton lifted his head to look at Leonardo and asked, "She's a poor thing? Have you forgotten what she did to Didi?" Leonardo replied, "But that's because she's sick. Imagine this. She's a depressed patient. All her beliefs come from Jessie, yet it's Jessie and her husband who cheated on her. That's why she acted aggressively." Colton looked at the document in his hand and replied, "There is a price for everything, and everyone needs to pay for their actions." Leonardo grinned and said, "Are you talking about yourself?" Colton lifted his head to look at him. Leonardo hastily shut up and left the office in case Colton wanted to scold him. In the corridor, he saw Freya coming out of the elevator and was shocked. "Miss Pruitt? What are you doing here?" Freya was holding a lunchbox in her hand as she looked toward Colton's office. "You go do your work." Leonardo nodded blankly. "All right, then." He scratched his head and went away. "This is rare. I can't believe that Miss Pruitt would come to the company." After all, Freya rarely appeared in black gold. Colton was reading a document, so he did not notice Freya. He thought it was Leonardo, so he said without lifting his head, "Why do you keep walking here and there like you're an idle person? Do you need me to find something for you to do?" Freya walked over to him without saying anything. When Colton lifted his head, he froze. Before he could say anything, Freya placed the lunchbox on the desk and said, "Do I look like an idle person to you?" Chapter 2277. Colton closed the document and explained, I thought you were Leonardo." Freya did not say anything and opened up the lunchbox. Colton looked at the lunchbox and asked hesitantly, "Did you come to bring me lunch? Are you going to eat it or not? If not, then I'm leaving." Just when Freya was about to close the lunchbox, he took it away. "I didn't say I'm not going to eat it." Colton picked up a fork and something came into his mind. He lifted his head and smiled at her. "I thought you said you were not going to talk to me for a week. Why did you suddenly want to bring me lunch?" He had assumed Freya was going to ignore him for a while, but now it seemed to him that her anger subsided quite quickly. He had not stayed in the study room last night for nothing. Freya squinted and forced a smile on her face. "Do you know about the last meal before execution?" Colton was rendered speechless. She placed her hands on the desk and looked at him. "This is your last meal." Colton took a bite from the chicken and said with a smile, "Did you put poison in it? No wonder it tastes so bland." She did not expect him to talk back to her. She took his fork away and said, "If you think it's bland, then don't eat it." It had taken her a lot of effort to prepare the meal. How dare he say that it was not tasty? Colton nodded. "Then I'll eat the spaghetti." He took a bite of the spaghetti and nodded. "Well, this tastes just fine, I guess." "Just fine? You think it's not appetizing either, right?" "Fine then. You'd better not eat it." Just when Freya was about to take the lunchbox away, he grabbed her hand. He looked her straight in the eyes and asked, "Are you really not going to let me finish it?" "You deserve to starve," she replied exasperatingly. "How do you know that I'm hungry?" Freya did not say anything. He had just eaten a bowl of cereal this morning, so it went without saying that he would get hungry later. Colton caressed the back of her hand and pressed on. "Why do you have to care for me so much, when you're angry with me?" "I'm not caring about you." Freya wanted to pull her hand back, but he held on to her tightly. "I didn't sleep well last night." She nodded. "So?" Colton looked at her deeply and asked, "I want you to pet me while I take a nap." "You what?" Freya did not know if she should get angry at him or if she should laugh. "You didn't sleep well last night? Then I think you shouldn't sleep anymore." Just when she turned around and was about to leave, she felt a pang of pain in her stomach. Colton hastily got up and walked up to her to hold her. "What's wrong?" Freya put her hand at her back, and her face was pale. "My stomach. It hurts." Colton was startled. He hastily scooped her up from the floor. "Hold on, I'll send you to the hospital right away." He called Leonardo while he was in the corridor. Leonardo rushed up to him and asked, "What happened, Mr. Goldman?" There was no time for him to explain any more as he said, "Hurry. Go get the car." "Okay. Right on it." Ignoring the attention he was gathering, Colton carried Freya out of the building. Leonardo opened the door for them and drove them to Central Hospital after getting into the car. Meanwhile, Ronald was waiting for the report in the inpatient department. When the doctor came out, he hesitated for a while before walking up to him. "How is my wife doing?" The doctor looked at the report and said, "Your wife is safe after we resuscitated her, but her condition is a bit complicated. There is a slim chance that she'll wake up, so you must be mentally prepared for it." "Are you saying that my wife may not wake up anymore?" asked Ronald. The doctor nodded. "That's what I'm saying. It all depends on heaven now." After that, the doctor left. Ronald was left standing on the spot. When he finally calmed down, he pushed the door to the ICU ward. Upon seeing that his wife was lying on the bed with an oxygen mask on, a smile appeared across his face. Even heaven was helping him. If there was a slim chance that she could wake up, he hoped she wouldn't wake up anymore, for the rest of her life. Chapter 2278. Colton was pacing back and forth anxiously in the obstetrics and gynecology inpatient department corridor. Leonardo looked at him and said, "Don't worry too much, Mr. Goldman. I think it's about time for Miss Pruitt to give birth." Colton was stunned. "She's giving birth soon?" He turned his head to look at Leonard and asked, "If she's giving birth soon, will it be painful?" Leonardo shrugged. "How would I know? I'm not a woman." After he finished speaking, he added, "But I heard that all of the women would look like this when they're about to give birth to a baby. Besides, Miss Pruitt's stomach is big, so I think it's about time." "Colton." Colton heard someone calling for him and turned his head around. "Mom? Dad?" Maisie and Nolan walked over to them and asked, "How is Freya?" He lowered his head and replied, "She's still inside there." The doctor came out and asked, "Who's Miss Pruitt's family?" Colton replied, "I am." The doctor looked at him and said in a stern voice, "Miss Pruitt is expected to give birth in the next few days, but I would like to remind you that the normal due date is 40 weeks, so Miss Pruitt's delivery at 34 weeks is considered premature birth. The baby will be weaker compared to a full-term baby and will easily get infected by diseases, so I hope you'll be prepared." Colton pressed his lips tightly and looked at the doctor. will she be in danger? The doctor was momentarily stunned and laughed. The risk for pregnant women is only in the delivery process, but I assure you that we'll do our best to keep the baby and the mother safe. He hesitated for a moment before asking, then will it be painful? Maisie chuckled. Is that you or Freya that's giving birth? The doctor laughed as well and replied, it varies from person to person, but giving birth to a baby is a process every woman must go through. They'll need to hang on to the pain until it's over. If you're worried about your wife, then treat her better in the future. After the doctor left, Maisie placed her hand on Colton's shoulder. Did you hear what the doctor said? If you're worried for her, then you need to treat her well in the future. Put aside all your work and keep her company for the time being until the baby is born. Colton lowered his head and nodded. After Colton went into the ward to look after Freya, Nolan suddenly held Maisie's shoulder and leaned closer to her. Was it painful when you gave birth to them that year? Maisie crossed her arms in front of her chest and turned around to look at him. Do you know what people would usually say to people like you? He chuckled. What is it? She kept her smile away and said, Monday, morning quarterback. Nolan was caught between tears and laughter. He hugged her even tighter in his arms and said, yes, I'm Monday, morning quarterback, but I just want to know. Maisie pretended to be angry and said, well, I'm telling you now, I was in so much pain that I didn't want to give birth to them anymore. Nolan kissed the top of her head and said, but I still want to thank you, Maisie. Thank you for bringing them into my life. She harumphed and said, stop being so sentimental. The smile on his face deepened. Leonardo did not know if he should stay or leave. He was embarrassed as he felt he shouldn't stay there anymore, since he was the only one who did not have a wife or girlfriend. The silver lining was that a call came and saved him. Inside the ward, Colton was sitting next to Freya's bed. There would be sporadic pain in Freya's stomach, and her waist was sore to the bone. Is the baby coming out soon? Colton comforted her. Don't worry. I'll be here with you. She was stunned. You'll be here with me? He nodded seriously. Freya put a pillow behind her so that she could lean as comfortably as possible. Is the sun coming out of the west? Colton pinched her cheek and said, how can you question me when I said I'll stay with you? Chapter 2279. Freya couldn't help but chuckle. She patted his hand and said, stop making me laugh. He placed her hand on his cheek and said, aren't you in a lot of pain now? I figure that I should take up the role and cheer you up a little. She laughed again. Take up the role and cheer me up? Why does it sound like you're reluctant to do it? Did I ask you to cheer me up? Colton sighed. You didn't want to pet me when I wanted to take a nap earlier, and now you're not letting me cheer you up. Do you really have to fight with a pregnant woman? Can't you just let me win for one time? Do you know that I'm so exasperated now that our baby is coming out? She was about to cry with exasperation. Colton suddenly let out a laugh and rose to his feet. He sat by the bed and pulled her into his arms. All right. I'll let you win once you've given birth to our baby. She tried to push him away. All you care about is the baby. Colton secured her tightly in his arms and said in a low voice, you're saying that to me now? Who is the one that only cared about Dee Dee in the past then? Freya was caught between tears and laughter. Colton cupped her cheeks in his palms and landed a kiss on her lips. Then, he said softly, you're the most important woman in my life. Maisie and Nolan, standing outside the ward, looked at each other. She raised her eyebrows and said, well, it seems like I don't have to worry about them anymore since they've made up with each other. Nolan chuckled and said, they didn't need us to worry about them from the beginning. Both of them laughed at each other and left. After Freya fell asleep, Colton came out of the ward. Leonardo walked over and looked toward the ward. Mr. Goldman, Mrs. George is in this hospital as well. Colton frowned. How is she? She's safe now, but has fallen unconscious because she hit her head. But the doctor has done what we told him to. Ronald thinks that his wife will never be able to wake up anymore. A cold smile crossed the corner of Colton's lips as he said, it's about time to give them a big present. The next day, Ronald brought Jessie to the ward. Jessie had a feeling that someone was watching them, so she kept looking around the ward. "What are you doing? Why did you bring me to your wife's ward?" Ronald hugged her and said, "Don't be scared. She won't be able to wake up anymore." Jessie was stunned. "She can't wake up anymore?" "Yeah. The doctor said that she'll be like this for the rest of her life." Ronald took a strand of her hair and kissed it. "Jessie, after she's dead, we can be together." Jessie felt a chill down her spine. He wants to kill his wife? Is he mad? Just as Jessie expected, Ronald was the most terrible man she had ever come across. Sensing the expression on her face, Ronald frowned. "What's wrong, Jessie?" She forced the nervousness clutching at her heart and replied, "Nothing. By the way, we're in the hospital now, so you'd better behave yourself." Ronald pinned her to the wall and kissed her. "Don't worry. I've told them not to come in." Gina's finger twitched on the bed, and she slowly opened her eyes. She vaguely heard that there was some noise in the ward, and when she slowly turned her head, the first thing she saw was that her husband was having sex with Jessie in her ward while she was unconscious. She clenched her fists tightly. Her son was still missing, yet her husband had pushed her down and caused her to fall unconscious because of Jessie. She was filled with anger. Her tears were trickling down her cheeks as she gnashed her teeth tightly. Suddenly, the door to the ward was pushed open, and a few reporters barged into the ward. When they saw what Ronald and Jessie were doing, a female reporter's face turned red with embarrassment. Jessie was so terrified that she quickly covered her body with her arms. Ronald was trying his best to put on his pants as he used his hand to block the camera. "What are you doing here? Get out of here. Stop filming. Mr. George, how can you have sex with another woman while your wife is in a coma? Mr. George, don't you feel ashamed to do things like this with your mistress in your wife's ward?" Chapter 2280. Ronald smashed their cameras and pointed at them. His face was contorted with anger as he roared, "I warn you. Get the hell out of here. Don't force me to beat you all up. Mr. George, are you mad with us? I heard that your mistress is your wife's psychologist. Can you tell us when you guys started seeing each other?" The group of reporters ignored Ronald. Even if he smashed their cameras, they still had their phones. The corridor of the hospital was so packed with people that nothing could get through at all. Soon, a few doctors came over to disperse the crowd. A few patients and family members from other wards came out and watched the show. "What's going on? I heard a man was having sex with his mistress inside his wife's ward." "What? How terrible. Can he even consider himself a man? He's such a disgrace." The news spread all over the internet rapidly. The titles such as #heartless man making out with his mistress in his wife's ward appeared everywhere on the internet. The number of people following this matter was even bigger than those who followed the incident where Cameron brutally beat up Gina. Those who crusaded against Cameron all shifted their target to Jessie. It took only half a day, and the information about Jessie was spread all over the internet. Many people criticized her, "Is it that easy to become a psychologist? Hashtag, she looks more like a sex doctor than a psychologist to me. Hashtag, I heard that Mrs. George wanted to file a divorce a long time ago, but Ronald wanted her to leave without taking any property. Mrs. George didn't agree, so I guess it's them who caused Mrs. George to be hospitalized. Hashtag." Shortly after the news came out, the bad things that Jessie had done in the past were revealed as well. She had 4 abortions and also had an affair with a doctor and a patient while she had a boyfriend during her tenure at the hospital. Even the bad things she did when she was having a relationship with Dr. Jefferson were exposed as well. She had cheated on him several times and looked down on him because he came from a humble background. After she forced him to take on a loan to buy a house, she broke up with him. She had a monthly salary of about $600, yet she could shop at various shopping malls that sold luxury brands. She could buy branded bags that cost about $15,000 without batting her eyes. It went without saying that she got all her money from Ronald. Besides, she had already been seeing Ronald before she broke up with Dr. Jefferson. Ronald was not in good shape either. All of his shareholders withdrew from his hotel. People were spraying red paint, throwing feces, placing wreaths, and so on in front of his hotel every day. No more customers were willing to step into the hotel, and he had no choice but to close down the hotel. At Emperon, Cameron was sitting on the couch with her legs crossed as she watched the news. Waylon was sitting next to her. He peeled an orange and popped a slice into her mouth. After she swallowed the orange, she clicked her tongue and said, "This woman has lost all her reputation. I guess no man would want to marry her now." Waylon popped another piece of orange into her mouth and asked, "What about you?" Cameron turned her head around and asked, "What about me?" Waylon put the orange peel on the table and leaned closer. "I'm a good man, so when are you going to marry me?" She was stumped and averted her eyes. How can you be so shameless?" The smile on his face deepened. "Am I not a good man?" She mumbled, "What's so good about you?" Waylon placed his arm across the back of the couch and looked at her in the eyes. "I'm handsome. I'm no inferior to you, and I can take care of you for the rest of your life." She was stunned. "Are you going to sell yourself off?" Waylon raised his eyebrows. "So, do you want it or not?" Cameron rolled her eyes and turned around to look at him. There had been a question bugging her for a while, and she decided to ask it now. "What do you really want from me?" Waylon put his finger on her lips and fixed his gaze on her face. "I want you.